Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. AJ may join 1 minute because AJ is today he's on a spiritual retreat in New Jersey. Okay, I think we read this one. Any reflections from yesterday's reading? I think we are supposed to do from here, right? Los Angeles, May 18. We haven't read this. We read this one. Paying Mr. 7,500.
Yeah, he began to worry about the deal. Yes, of the Hare Krishna land.
Yes.
Govinda sorry.
Oh, you're saying something, no problem.
Yeah, Govinda Dasi went to Russia to marry someone and also to preach Krishna consciousness over there.
That is Govinda Dasi? It's not Govinda Dasi, no? Do you all remember the name? Govinda Dasi was already Prabhupada's disciple, but the one you're referring to is from which country it was? Oh, here, yeah. Then he turned to Govinda, said, preaching while you're young, you're old, retired to Vrindavan and chant Hare Krishna. These centers in India are built. So he's told to Govindasi, but I don't think Govindasi went for
okay.
French disciple, right? A French disciple, Mandakini Devidasi.
Okay.
Govindasi was Prabhupada's secretary also for some time. So she went to join Russian boy in Soviet Union. Marry him and assist him in propagating Krishna consciousness. So that's how Prabhupada's movement is so wonderful. Anyone can easily attain perfection. Anyone can easily attain the perfection. Isn't it such a beautiful? In one life, a child or man, a human, because all other austerities one cannot perform. And Prabhupada is directly putting one to a spiritual platform. Just by offering whatever one has, one talent was, just very genuinely, sincerely, if you just say, I belong to Krishna and I'm serving, that's it. One can attain the spiritual world in this lifetime. It's amazing, Prabhupada, how he created. And we also have the same similar opportunity. We also have the same opportunity. So here, I don't know if you've read this one, but I'll read this one. Time and time again, his thinking turned to Bombay, Vrindavan and Mayapur, but he did not talk much about the problems. Rather, the devotees and non-devotees in each place he visited got the full blessings of his attention. While lecturing on Srimad Bhagavatam, he was in full concentration, and when he spoke privately, cultivating a guest or guiding an individual disciple, he fully gave himself. That he took responsibility for many persons and worldwide matters, and did it also graciously, always appearing before his devotees each morning on a walk or in the temple as fresh as a morning blooming lotus flower, was the expert nature of his devotional service to Krishna. He was open and simple, with a motive to so pure that anyone could see it, and yet he was also grave beyond anyone's vision. He served Krishna simply in each time and place, whether riding the hotel elevator with his two disciples in Hong Kong, or curiously noting the details of Japanese culture, or walking on the beach beneath a Hawaiian sky. Los Angeles, May 18, 1972. Word has spread that Srila Prabhupada wanted GBC secretaries to get out from behind the desk and preach. And 4 American GBC men eager to become sannyasis were waiting when Srila Prabhupada arrived in Los Angeles. Sasur, Prabhupada said that because we are taking sannyas in the prime of youth, we had ample opportunity to do much more than he. He said he had taken sannyas at the fag end of life, but that a little is better than nothing. Everyone laughed at the thought that we could do more than Prabhupada. One by one, we went to the Vyasasana and Prabhupada gave us our three dandas and said, now preach, preach, and preach. Immediately afterward, Prabhupada had us up in his room. We asked him if there were any special instruction. He said there were two restrictions in sannyas life. One was that when meeting a rich man and seeing his opulent wealth, we must not think, oh, I have given up everything, but I wish I could enjoy these things. And the other restriction was that when we see a beautiful woman, we must not think, I had a beautiful wife and now this beautiful woman is here. I could enjoy her. In other words, do not have any regrets about having taken sannyas. Jagadish. Prabhupada had all the GBC men come to Los Angeles, where some of them took sannyas, and we discussed reapportioning preaching zones. We had one special meeting with Prabhupada. All the GBC men were sitting there in the room, and Prabhupada looked us all over. He said, are you all convinced? We just sat there. Nobody said anything for about 2 minutes. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. Prabhupada challenging us. Are you convinced? Are you sincere? As Prabhupada spoke, his GBC disciples listened intently. As far as I am concerned, he said, I am convinced. Therefore, I am pushing on. It is a fact. I am pushing on because it is a fact, not fiction. That much I am personally convinced. Whenever someone says, you believe, I say, no, I don't. You believe, I say, I do. No, I do not believe. It is a fact. So you must spread your conviction in your literature, arguments, preaching, facing opposition elements. But are you convinced? If you are not convinced, then it is not good for me. The first thing is enthusiasm. Don't be dead. You have to work more than me. Anyone who has life, he can preach. So Prabhupada, even though his world travel tour, but in his back of his mind, so, the important things are going on. He was worried about Vrindavan, Mayapur, and especially Bombay project. Even though he was so much of thinking of those with his absence, how they can do, but still the special character his future of Prabhupada is given that he was never expressing his anxieties in front of anyone. He was still unaffected in his day-to-day activities, in his devotional service, with his morning walk, while dealing with new people, or while talking with personal to anyone. He was as if like totally aloof, but still he was really concerned. Uh, um, Concerned, and he knows that this is he needs to deal with. But it is such a spiritual power. He has no a glimpse of those expressions in his face. That's what devotees are sharing. And now he's in Los Angeles in 1972, May 18, 1972, where GBC meeting seems going in. Los Angeles is the headquarters for at least in America. So GBC secretaries gathered, American GBC men were gathered, and 4 of them were waiting to take initiation, sannyas initiation. And looks like Sasur Swami Maharaj is one of the one. Now he's saying that because he's giving sannyas is because of urgent, a lot of tasks needs to be done. Now he's saying that you all have taken sannyas very early age. It means you can do way more than me. So little better than I could not do anything. I just could do a little better. So everybody's kind of this thing. You say in old age, you're doing hundreds of projects, and you're saying we will do better than us, and that's the mind they were thinking. So then immediately Prabhupada they asked any special instruction for, because they have taken sannyas. He said that never aspire for enjoying the money from rich people, thinking that's because you already given up. You already spit everything, all the world enjoyment. Never think of anytime when you see human think, oh, I had a man, I had a wife, and never let that come in the dream. Never regret about taking sannyas. So he says that Jagdish Prabhu is saying that all the GBC people are there. Now they're planning to reapportioning preaching zones. They have to see the areas who will oversee what are the temples, like that kind of thing. But however, his primary point is, are you convinced? Are you convinced of Krishna consciousness? Are you convinced of everything? Because if you're not convinced, it's a big problem. We cannot convince others. So he was stressing, now you're representing the movement, you're sannyas. Are you convinced? I said, I'm convinced. Whenever somebody said, so you believe? I said, no, it's a fact. I'm convinced because it's a reality, and Krishna is the truth, eternal truth, and absolute truth. And I know I'm working for Krishna without any faith or without any 100% complete conviction Prabhupada had. So I want all of you should be convinced what you're doing. Other, at the end of the day, your doubt will come, the fear will come, it'll say, oh, am I doing right? It'll come actually. I don't know if anyone did you had any experience like that, Prabhu? Did you come many times? Did you have some similar feelings?
Yes,
You
Prabhu,
know,
yeah, basically, if you're not convinced, we cannot do that. And sometimes we ask ourselves, are we on the right path?
Yes, because a big change. It's a big change, and now you will have so that's called anarthas. And it's okay, we have anartha. That's why anartha nibriti stays. Once anarthas goes, the conviction will come. The reality will. Krishna consciousness reality. It's not a faith or now I'm doing just like. So that will come. So. So he's saying that first thing is enthusiasm. If you're convinced, you will be enthusiastic. Okay, then don't be dead. You have to work more than me. Anyone who is alive, he can preach. Basically, now you have taken sannyas, you're taking the responsibility. Now work on lot of projects needs to be done in preaching and spreading Krishna consciousness. Prasanthi, please.
So the local president and treasurer of the temple will manage. The GBC will supervise that things are going on. But the first management is that each and every member is chanting 16 rounds and following the regulations. Otherwise, otherwise that is our spiritual strength. Now it is in our hands. That was my plan, to give it to the Americans. But you have to be spiritually strong. If superficially we want to be managers, it won't be good. And simply touring is not required. By traveling, you have to do something substantial to increase the society. At the time of Lenin, he had just a few men and he took over the entire country. It is up to you to spread God consciousness. Don't be stagnant. Go and preach. Your duty is to inform them. My dear American brothers, you have so much wealth and pleasure. Use it for Krishna. If not, it will be degradation. Srila Prabhupada met with many US ISKCON leaders in Los Angeles and saw the wide array of Krishna conscious activities in his Western World headquarters. He heard a new recording of Krishna bhajans performed with guitars and other Western instruments produced at the devotee's own Golden Avatar studio, and he approved it, saying, "This is better than George Harrison." He visited the art studio where the devotees were painting illustrations for his books and he made suggestions. Ananga Manjari. Prabhupada was going around looking at all the different temple offices. In one office, Karandara was showing Prabhupada a new computer. "Prabhupada," he said, All we have to do is type the words Rupa Goswami, and then it will automatically write everything you have ever said or written about Rupa Goswami. Prabhupada had been looking at the computer without showing much interest. But when Karandara said the name Rupa Goswami, Prabhupada raised his eyebrows and said, "Oh, yes, everything can be used in Krishna's service." Then he walked out of that office and went to the telex machine. Prabhupada sat before it in the chair, and everyone stood around him while Karandara explained what the machine did. It can write a message all the way to New York, and they can send a message back immediately. Srila Prabhupada. So Karandara typed on the telex machine, Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, please respond. There was no answer. So he typed it out again and again. Then there was no answer. So he typed it out again, and this time he typed out, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is sitting right next to the telex machine. Please respond. All of a sudden, the machine started typing out a reply, and Prabhupada was sitting there watching it. The type read, Dear Srila Prabhupada, please accept our most humble obeisances at your lotus feet. We will be very eager to see your divine grace in 3 days in New York. Srila Prabhupada spoke out, Jaya Hari Bol. The message from New York was signed by many devotees, and Prabhupada just smiled and said, This is very nice.
Haribol. Jai Haribol. Huh? Now let's see how you explain. The magic is coming. See, just on time, Prabhupada's time, magic is coming.
Prabhupada says the local president and the treasurer of the temple will manage the temple, and the GBC can supervise the things overall. But the first management for each and every member is to chant 16 rounds, which is the most important thing for all the members, and that will give them spiritual strength to preach further. And
so you understood what is our primary thing. All our members claim that must be chanting, 16 rounds, or chanting is essential very much. Otherwise, we will be simply creating a society of chaos. Yeah, go ahead, Prasanthi.
So one should not try to be managers. That it would not be good. First, they have to be spiritually strong, and automatically they can preach and substantially increase Krishna consciousness in the society. And he gave the example of Lenin. Like he took up the entire country with very few men. So he says we can also do that and spread God consciousness to the whatever areas we are working on. And we can use wealth and we can use as much wealth and pleasure, and we can use it for Krishna rather than for materialistic purposes.
Basically, see, he's saying, tell these American boys like this. Your duty is to inform them, my dear American brothers, you have so much wealth and pleasure, use it for Krishna. If not, it'll be DA. So he's asking sannyasis go and preach like that way. So you can do it. That's okay. Yes.
So Srila Prabhupada also met many ISKCON leaders in Los Angeles, and he saw a wide array of activities being conducted over there. He saw bhajans being recorded with Western instruments, and he approved it, and he said they are better than George Harrison. And he also made suggestions for paintings for his books. Ananga Manjari says he looked around he walked into different offices and supervised everything. And at one place, a guy showed a new computer and how he can use it. And Prabhupada said, like, we can use all these for the service of Krishna. And even the telex machine, Karandara explained how to use it. and then they typed a message. Initially, they did not get a response back from New York, but when he said Prabhupada is sitting next to me, immediately they got a response and they offered their obeisances. And Prabhupada was very pleased. He said to use all these for the service of Krishna.
It's a first time experience of Prabhupada, right? It's a telex. Anyone heard about it? It's like a messaging system, huh? Or email. It was not, I don't know if we won't call it email. Email didn't come that time, no? But telex was there, looks like. So, is this a New York devotee? So New York also had this machine. I think they will have all these machines soon everywhere, I'm assuming. It's interesting experience, right? For Prabhupada, first time getting into this, using this technology. Okay, so Prabhupada is happy to have that. Yeah, Nipa? Nipa, you're there?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, yes.
At this time, distribution of Prabhupada's books by his disciples was taking on a new dimension in America, and Prabhupada heard the latest reports. From the beginning of his preaching in the West, he had stressed printing and distributing his books as the most important method of preaching Krishna consciousness. He said his spiritual master had told him to print and distribute books and that he was following blindly. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had been pleased if a disciple distributed even only a few copies of his magazine. In the beginning years of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada had also been pleased when his disciples had distributed a few hundred copies of Back to Godhead each month. Gradually, his will for increasing the distribution of transcendental literature had manifested through certain devotees. In Los Angeles in 1968, Tamale Krishna had daily taken a large Kirtana party downtown. The party, in addition to chanting and dancing, had circulated among the crowd and distributed Back to Godhead magazines, as many as 100 in a single day. When Prabhupada had heard these reports, he had felt encouraged and had asked for the devotees to increase. Prabhupada saw book distribution not only as the best method of preaching but also as fair means of income. In India, the brahmacharis in the traditional Gurukul system would beg from door to door, but in the West, such a practice would not be respected. But every gentleman will give a quarter for Back to Godhead, Prabhupada had said. Even as Prabhupada turned more toward India and his projects there, he continued to encourage his disciples, especially in the West, to distribute his books. Please increase your program of distribution to the public as well as trying to place our books and magazines in the libraries. I am simply interested in the book distribution. To the devotees in New York, he had written in 1971. I am especially pleased to hear that your book distribution of books and magazines has increased. Go on in this way, increasing more and more. Each time someone reads some solid information about Krishna, his life becomes changed in some way. These literatures are the solid ground upon which our preaching stands. So I want that they would be available to everyone, as many as possible. So please try for this. This, here it's saying that the distribution of books by his disciples, Prabhupada's disciples, was taking a new dimension in America, and Prabhupada heard the latest reports. And from beginning to preach in West, he always emphasized that printing and distribution is important part of Krishna, preaching Krishna consciousness. And he said his spiritual master had told him to do so, and he followed it blindly. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had been pleased if any disciple would be able to even distribute few copies of his magazine. In the beginning years of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada was very pleased that his disciples had distributed 100 copies of Back to Godhead each month. And gradually he wanted to increase the distribution of transcendental literature through his certain devotees. In Los Angeles in 1968, Tamal Krishna had also taken a large Kirtana party downtown where the devotees were not only chanting and dancing but also circulating the Back to Godhead magazines, as many as 100 in a single day, which hearing this, Prabhupada felt very encouraged. and asked the devotees to keep doing and increasing it. Prabhupada saw that the distribution of book is the best method of preaching and also a fair means of income. In India, the brahmacharis in the traditional Gurukul system would go from door to beg, but in West, such practice was not respected. And every gentleman would give a quarter for back to Godhead, Prabhupada had mentioned. Even as Prabhupada turned more towards India and projects, he still encouraged his disciples, especially in the West, to continue to distribute the books and increase the program of distribution to the public and trying to place the books and magazines in libraries. And he's simply interested in the book distribution. And to the devotees in the New York, he had written in 1971 that he's pleased to hear that the distribution of books and magazines has increased. And he said, go on.
You didn't read that actually.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Second proof.
Hare Krishna. To the devotees in Australia, he wrote, that's from there, right, Prabhu? The devotees in Australia.
Yeah.
To the devotees in Australia, he wrote, the best news is that you are increasing nicely the distribution of my books and literature. This is the best activity.
Sorry. To that, you have to read to the devotees in New York.
Yeah, okay. To the devotees in New York, he had written in 1971, I am especially pleased to hear that your distribution of books and magazines has increased. Go on in this way, increasing more and more. Each time someone reads some solid information about Krishna, his life becomes changed in some way. These literatures are the solid ground upon which our preaching stands. So I want that they should be available to everyone, as many as possible. So please try for this. To the devotees in Australia, he wrote, the best news is that you are increasing nicely the distribution of my books and literature. This is the best activity, to distribute solid information about Krishna. Our preaching stands solid on these books. No other movement has such vast background of authority. And to the devotees of Africa, Prabhupada wrote, distribution of books and magazines is our most important activity. Without books, our preaching has no solid basis. Especially the Africans want our books. Srila Prabhupada said if there were ample books, then everything else in ISKCON would succeed. Practically, our society is built on books. One book is not very impressive. Still, a blind uncle is better than no uncle at all. So it is very nice that one book has appeared and that BTG is appearing at least several issues in other languages. But now try to produce at least 4 or 5 new books per year in several languages, plus regularly BTG every month. Apply yourself fully to this very great responsibility of producing numerous books in foreign languages. Back in 1968, when 10,000 copies of teachings of Lord Chaitanya had arrived at the temple in New York, Brahmanand Swami had wondered how they would ever distribute so many hardbound books on the lofty philosophy of Lord Chaitanya. But in 1970, with the publication of another book, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, some of the devotees in San Francisco had begun to go door to door, person to person, and sell the books. And not only 1 or 2 books, but 20, 30, even 40 a day. The enthusiasm had spread as devotees in other temples had begun to sell increasing number of Srila Prabhupada's books. Next, the young man had begun traveling in vans, going out all day, day after day, to discover the greatest ecstasy of distributing Prabhupada's books. Then a competition had started. Keshava's boast that the devotees in Francisco were the best had drawn challenges from the devotees in Los Angeles, New York, Denver, and Dallas. A Sankirtana fever had begun. And at the center was Srila Prabhupada, assuring that unquestionably book distribution had the topmost priority of all his missionary activities. So here Prabhupada emphasizes book distribution to the letters he wrote to devotees in New York, where he says that when somebody reads solid information about Krishna, his life changes in some way. And these literatures are the like the basic, the foundation. They're the solid ground on which our preaching stands. In Australia, also he mentioned the same thing, and also says that no other movement has such a vast background of authoritative scriptures. And in Africa, for devotees in Africa, Prabhupada wrote that books are books are the essence. Without books, there is no solid basis for preaching, and all the Africans want our books. And Prabhupada says that, and also he emphasizes here that not only publishing books, but publishing books in different foreign languages. And he requests to see if they can produce at least 4 or 5 new books per year in several languages, and plus the regular BTG. So in 1968, when 10,000 copies of teachings of Lord Chaitanya arrived, Brahmananda Swami had wondered how they would distribute that many books, which was like a little bit more philosophical it was of teachings of Lord Chaitanya. But when another book, Krishna book, got published, the devotees in San Francisco had begun door-to-door book distribution, and they used to sell books, and they used to sell sometimes like even 40 books a day. And this enthusiasm spread across other temples. And then they also had young people traveling in vans to distribute Prabhupada's books. Then there was also a competition amongst the various temples to see who does more book distribution. And for Prabhupada, this undoubtedly was the topmost priority of ISKCON.
That's it.
I think that's it.
So so hope you all understand. This is just the beginning, right? So we have to carry this mission forward, and we understand, and we need to make it as a priority. And I said, as I said, the one who's alive, he will preach. So this is a missionary activities. We need to always constantly think and how we'll do. Okay, Vijayanand Prabhu.
Prabhupada also stressed that all the devotees should regularly study his books. The books were not only for the public, the devotees must read them and know them, or else how could they preach? In the Los Angeles temple room, Prabhupada would have the devotees take part in pronouncing and chanting responsively the daily Sanskrit verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Then individual devotees would take turns chanting the verse alone, while the while the other devotees would again respond collectively. Hridayananda Goswami. When Prabhupada came to Los Angeles in 1972, he started the Bhagavatam class where everyone chanted the Sanskrit. One effect was that devotees become more grave, a little more civilized. Just at the time, things were a little wild in America. The Sankirtana parties were doing so many wild things, staying out all hours of the night, sleeping anywhere, eating anything. Previously, the temples had been a little sedate and actually even a little dry because the devotees were not giving out many books. And then when the Sankirtana got a little heavy, it was almost like a rodeo consciousness. This wild Sankirtana, like bronco busting, but Prabhupada came and introduced the chanting of Sanskrit mantra word for word, and the devotees submitted to a more grave and formal program. On the 1st June, Srila Prabhupada left Los Angeles for Mexico City. He said he would return in a few weeks. Prabhupada conducted an intensive 3-day lecture campaign in Mexico City, speaking at the National University of Mexico, the Masonic Lodge, and the Theosophical Society, and appearing on a television show with some 30 million viewers. He also had initiations at the temple on 2 consecutive days. Mexico was similar to India, he said, with pious people and a tropical climate. Even when he walked early in the morning in Chapultepec Park, many people followed him back to the temple. They recognized him as a saint and wanted his benediction. Chitsukananda. On Sunday afternoon, there were more than 500 people in the temple room. After the lecture, Srila Prabhupada went back to his room alone, and there was a big kirtana with 500 to 600 people chanting Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. They become very, very ecstatic, and it seemed like the temple walls are going to come down. I was in Srila Prabhupada's room, and he said, "What is this? Kirtana? They're making so much noise." So here Prabhupada says that he was stressing that all the devotees should regularly study his books because books are not only for the public, and the devotees must read and know them. Otherwise, it will be difficult for them to preach. And in the Los Angeles temple room, Prabhupada would have the devotees like take part in the pronouncing and chanting responsively the Sanskrit verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, and the devotees would take turns chanting the verse alone, while other devotees would respond collectively. And Hridayananda Goswami says, when Prabhupada came to Los Angeles in 1972, he started the Bhagavatam class where everyone chanted the Sanskrit verses. And one effect was that like devotees become more grave and a little more civilized. Like at that time, things were like little wild in America. The Sankirtana party were doing like very wild things. They were staying out all hours of the night and sleeping anywhere and eating anything. And previously the temple were like little sedate, but actually now and earlier like sedate and devotees were not giving out many books. But after the Sankirtana got a little heavy, it was like a rodeo consciousness. And the wild Sankirtana became like a bronco busting. But Prabhupada came and introduced the chanting of Sanskrit mantra for word for word, and devotees submitted to a like more grave and formal program. And then Prabhupada left to Los Angeles, left Los Angeles for Mexico City, and he had told the devotees that he will be returning in a few weeks. And Prabhupada conducted an intensive 3-day lecture campaign in Mexico City. He was speaking at the Natural University of Mexico and the Theosophical Society, and also he was appearing in a television show with some 30 million viewers, and so he did the initiations on 2 consecutive days. And Prabhupada mentioned that Mexico was similar to India with pious people and the tropical climate. And when he had his early morning walk in the park, nearby park, many people followed him back to the temple, and they recognized him as a saint, and they are looking for benedictions from him. And here Chitsukananda says on one Sunday afternoon, there were like 500 people in the temple room, and after the lecture, Prabhupada went to his room alone, and there was like a big kirtana with 500 to 600 people chanting Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada and Prabhupada. They become very ecstatic, and it seems like the temple walls will come down. And in the Srila Prabhupada's room, he said like, what is it? Is it kirtana? Like they are making so much noise.
So what you learned, our Vijayanand Prabhu, from this?
Regarding the book distribution, even like
no, about this one.
Oh, this one, Kirtana, like Kirtana, like we should make.
Okay, it's interesting. I didn't expect Prabhupada will say, what is this? Kirtan? They're making so much of noise. Anyways, it's okay. It's not a big thing. He just probably commented. I was amazed. In 1970, Mexico had a television show with 30 million viewers. I don't think in India had a television that time, right? I think early 80s is television. What do you all think? You don't know.
Don't remember much. One in 78, so I don't know much.
So I think it came on early 80s only that television came. I guess, but Mexico that time there itself. Vijayan Prabhu, how many books you're going to distribute this month? Huh?
So no, Prabhu, like with this pandemic.
Pandemic, no distribution as well. You can just do online. We will ship it. Don't worry. We have a link. You can reach out and say, okay, this is what you need. So just take it and we'll ship it online. Will that okay?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah. So I can send the link. Everybody can try. We need to try the Srimad Bhagavatam also this time. Okay. I think I need to read, right? I said, they are chanting your name, and I went down to see what was going on. And all the people were waiting to come into Prabhupada's room. Oh my, 500 people. It was like they wanted to charge up to Prabhupada's room to be able to see him. They kept yelling his name, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. So I came up to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, they want to see you. And Srila Prabhupada said, well, let them come. So I immediately arranged that people could come in. He had 2 doors in his room, and they were coming in through one door and on the left side, and leaving through the other door on the right side. One by one in a line, they just filtered through like a great parade, coming and offering on different words to Srila Prabhupada. Most of the people were saying in Spanish, Your Divine Grace, Your Holiness, please bless me, give me your benediction. Everyone is praying for his benediction. And as the people would come in, they would bow down. Everyone was extremely submissive. And there were many people with tears in their eyes to see the great saint, Srila Prabhupada. And they said, Srila Prabhupada, please give me your blessings. Wow, that's amazing. Huh? Prabhupada asked, it's not even in India is like that. Prabhupada asked me, what are they saying? And I said, give me one blessing, one benediction. So he had his hand in his bead bag, and with his finger outside his bead bag, he would point to them and say, Hare Krishna. And they were all very happy. Prabhupada also traveled to Cuernavaca. I don't know if Cuernavaca or Cuernavaca, where he lectured out of doors at the city plaza before a crowd of thousands. The audience sat patiently and heard his words translated into Spanish. Wow. Chitsukananda, just then we had turned out our first book, La Conciencia de Krishna. SL Sistema Mas I'm reading Spanish now. Elevado de Yoga. Krishna consciousness in the topmost yoga system. And Srila Prabhupada, during his lecture at the plaza at Cuernavaca, saw Hayaya Das arrive with newly printed copies of his red book, La Conciencia de Krishna, SL Sistema Mas Alvaro de Yoga. So Prabhupada looked at him and was very happy to see his book printed. He stopped his lecture and said, now you can all take one of these books and read them. And the people actually came up to Srila Prabhupada to get the books. We only brought about 50 copies, but all 50 copies were sold personally. The people took the liberty to ask Srila Prabhupada for an autographed book, and he autographed almost all 50 copies. Wow. After the plaza lecture, there was a hotel lecture, and when then Srila Prabhupada was supposed to go to a devotee's home in Cuernavaca to take prasadam and rest, but Srila Prabhupada decided he wanted to return to the temple in Mexico City. He got back around 8 p.m. So from 8 in the morning, from the 8 in the morning until 8 that night, he had not taken a bite of food, only a little water. We offered him fruits, things, but he didn't want anything. So now his Prabhupada is in Mexico City. I was confused. I thought Mexico City is in America somewhere. Is Mexico City in Mexico? Huh? Anyone knew?
Yes, Prabhu, yeah. It is the capital.
Oh, it's the capital? Mexico City is the capital of Mexico? Okay. So 3-day campaign. I think we already read this, right? So Prabhupada was saying, what's going on? So our Chit Sukananda Prabhu, he went and see what this, they all want to see you, have your darshan. And Prabhupada said, okay, let them come in. So they made a queue, one by one coming, just like in India's saints. Very simple people, by seeing had a faith in the saints. How, I'm amazed how they could develop that faith so shortly. It means they're very pious people. Otherwise you won't do that. So one by one came and they said, give me blessings, give me this. And Prabhupada said, Hare Krishna, didn't understand what they're asking for. Anyway, so then Prabhupada went to travel to Cuernabacha. Cuernabacha is a place for an outdoor preaching place. Thousands of, crowd of thousands attended. And he introduced the book. Krishna, he mentioned about the first book about Krishna consciousness, the topmost yoga system in Spanish. And they got the 50 books, and all the 50 books were taken from the hands of Srila Prabhupada, which is autographed, all 50 copies. Then he was supposed to go to devotees' home for taking prasadam, but decided to come back to Mexico City. So from morning 8 until night 8, he didn't take anything, just little water. But even after he came back home, he didn't take anything. When he returned to his home, his eyes were shining, his smile was broad, and he said, "This is the way to be happy. All work all day for Krishna." All he wanted was a cup of hot milk with puris and a cup of sugar. He pressed the puris into the sugar, and he drank. Oh, pressed the puris into the sugar like a sandwich, and he drank the milk with great joy and happiness. He said, "This is our life, to serve Krishna. Work all day for Krishna and take a little prasadam at night." Such a simple and beautiful service. Huh? Okay. Prasant, you please read.
On returning to Los Angeles, Prabhupada was again the center of burgeoning Krishna conscious activities there. But again his thoughts turned to Bombay, and he telegrammed Giriraja instructing him to settle the conveyance immediately. Giriraja, after receiving Prabhupada's cable, went to Mr. N only to learn of a further complication. After Prabhupada had signed the sales agreement, the Indian government had passed a law obliging Mr. N to pay a 5 lakh gains tax upon executing the conveyance. Mr. N didn't have 5 lakhs at present and told Giriraja that his con should pay, and he would apply it towards the mortgage. But Bombay ISKCON didn't have 5 lakhs either. So Mr. N suggested Giriraja take a bank loan and secure funds from ISKCON temples in the US. He promised that in the meantime he would not sell the land to anyone else. Giriraja tried to get a loan from the bank, but he had no security or credit. He turned to some of the life members for help to see if they could act as guarantors for a loan. But although sympathetic, they could not help him raise the money. Giriraja also began to doubt Mr. N's word. Although naive about legal matters, Giriraja was becoming suspicious of Mr. N's character and his dealings. Taking, talk, Talking with life members, Giriraja learned that actually Mr. N was notorious for illegal business tactics. When previously Mr. N had signed an agreement with C Company for the very same land he was now selling to Prabhupada, the sales agreement had eventually been cancelled because C Company had not gotten permission from the municipality for subdividing plots of land, and on the conditions of Mr. N's sale of the land had been that C Company get government permission to use the land. According to some of the businessmen with whom Giriraja spoke, Mr. N, through his political connections, had influenced the government against the C Company. Mr. N had seemed very helpful, giving the devotees a good price for a land, and now providing workers for clearing it. And Mrs. N had often attended Prabhupada's classes, but there also seemed to be many contradictions in Mr. N's behavior. Prabhupada was traveling in Mexico and also thinking about the Bombay activities. He telegrammed Giriraja instructing him to start the conveyance immediately. And Giriraja, after receiving the cable, went to Mr. N and found some more complication. Government asked him to pay. This is the version of Mr. N was the government asked to pay 5 lakhs, So he doesn't have 5 lakhs. So he asked Giriraja to pay and he would apply towards the mortgage later. And then they can do the sales deed. But ISKCON also did not have 5 lakhs. So Mr. N suggested to secure funds from temples in US. And Giriraja tried to, Giriraja tried to get a bank loan, but there is no guarantee, no security to show. He turned towards life members, but they also couldn't help. But Giriraja started to doubt Mr. N's word, and he came to know about N's dealings. He is notorious for illegal business tactics. when he initially signed an agreement with company C for the same land, the C company had to get some permission from the government in order to subdivide the plots. But N made sure that using his political connections, N made sure that he will not get those permissions. And finally, he sold the land to Prabhupada. So Giriraja was becoming suspicious about N's character. There were contradictions. They were helping in one way and not providing the sales deal in another way.
It's an interesting tactics, huh? You sign it, he was making the other company that you need a conditioning that you get the permit from the government, but behind is a government influence on the government. So that's the way he was trying to trick. Looks like. Second one.
Hearing of these problems by mail, Prabhupada considered them manageable. If a government tax had been imposed, then the devotees should deal with that and also continue trying for a loan. Certainly, Mr. N was tricky, but Prabhupada felt ISKCON's position was strong. Giriraj should persist. Without becoming confused by Mr. N, Prabhupada advised Giriraj to approach Mrs. Sumati Morarji and other supporters for financial help. It is a unique temple in the world, and if you show your wonderful abilities as American and European boys and girls to manage everything superbly, she will not hesitate to entrust you in every way. Therefore, there must always be goodwill and cooperation amongst yourself for this huge task ahead. I always think of our Juhu place, and I want that it shall be the model for all the world to emulate and respect as the perfect example of a Krishna conscious community. Portland, Oregon, June 8, 1972. From Los Angeles, Prabhupada went briefly to Portland, where 50 of his disciples from San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver, as well as Portland, had congregated to meet him. From Portland, he rode by car to Eugene, where he lectured at a large hall before an audience of mostly hippies. Every temple in the US wanted Srila Prabhupada, and although Prabhupada could not visit them all, he remained open to brief visits and public lectures in faraway places. He would sometimes confide to his traveling secretary that his disciples should do this preaching, but then another lecture opportunity would arise, promoted by an enthusiastic group of devotees, and Prabhupada would surprise everyone by agreeing to go. After returning to Los Angeles for 4 days, Prabhupada then flew to New York for a week and then on to London for 2 weeks. In London, George Harrison and Ravi Shankar visited him several times at the Bury Place Temple. When George asked if he should shave his head and try to live like the other devotees, Prabhupada replied that he should continue to be a singer. If you tell people to chant Hare Krishna, Prabhupada reminded George they will do it. July 20. From England, Prabhupada went to Paris, where he lectured and performed an outdoor initiation ceremony at the Luxembourg Gardens. Hundreds of people, most of them student radicals from the nearby university, gathered to watch. Srila Prabhupada began his talk saying, "You French people have a history of being revolutionary because you are looking for a better way of life." When the words were translated into French, the students cheered and applauded. Srila Prabhupada continued, "Therefore, you should inquire into this Krishna consciousness. It is a revolutionary movement for reviving our original God consciousness." About 30 devotees from Germany had come to Paris, and most of them, along with many devotees from England, Amsterdam, and Paris, received initiation that day at Luxembourg Gardens. In Paris, Prabhupada also attended a successful 4-day indoor festival where he was pleased to lecture and lead kirtan each night. So, when Prabhupada had the exchange of letters with Giriraj about the Juhu project and his dealings with Mr. N, Prabhupada thought that it is manageable, and he said Giriraj should persist without becoming confused with Mr. N. And he also asked Giriraj to approach Mrs. Sumati Morarji and other supporters for financial help. And he says that if you manage everything superbly, she will not hesitate to trust you and everywhere, and she will support. So there should be goodwill and cooperation amongst all the devotees there for these huge tasks. And he says that he wants this Juhu place to be a perfect example of a Krishna consciousness community. Then from Los Angeles, Prabhupada goes to Portland, where 50 of his disciples from San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver, they all congregate to meet him. And from Portland, he goes to Eugene, where he lectured at a large hall before an audience of mostly hippies. And then there were many temples in the US, and every temple wanted Srila Prabhupada to come, and Prabhupada could not visit them all. And he was open to go to give any public lectures or brief visits in faraway places. And he would also sometimes confide to his secretary that his disciples should do the preaching. But when another lecture opportunity arises, and if an enthusiastic group of devotees promotes and requests Prabhupada, then Prabhupada would surprise everyone and agree to go. So he came back to Los Angeles for 2 days, and then from there he went to New York for a week, and from New York he went to London. In London, George Harrison and Ravi Shankar visited him at the Beauty Place temple. When George Harrison asked if he should shave his head and try to live like the other devotees, Prabhupada says, no, you can continue to be a singer and ask the people to chant Hare Krishna, and if you ask them, they will do it. And from England, Prabhupada goes to Paris, where certain devotees from Germany and England, Amsterdam, and Paris came, and this was in front of the students, and he gives a lecture saying that French people have a history of revolutionary because they're looking for a better way of life, and he says that therefore you should inquire into Krishna consciousness, and this was met by applause from the students. On the same day, he gave initiation to all the devotees who came from Germany, Paris, and Amsterdam at the same gardens. And they also had a 4-day indoor festival where Prabhupada was lecturing and leading kirtans each night.
A big difference from the last visit. I think he had visited before also, like Paris once, remember? You all forget?
Yeah, I think there was a cafe or some, I don't know if it was Paris or if it was...
Yeah, in the cafe. They asked him to sit there. He said, do they sell meat? So they didn't know, it's all new. Like Australia is all new. So Prabhupada, like second time visits, more empowered every place. Nipa?
July 26th, in Amsterdam, Prabhupada installed deities of Lord Jagannatha, Lord Balrama, and Subhadra, and lectured at Wandle Park before thousands of hippies. One day at Wandle Park, a devotee was addressing the crowd when Prabhupada suddenly told his disciples to stop. These people are useless, he said. Just hold Kirtana. Later, he wrote to a disciple in the West. We are observing here in Europe many hippies have become so disgusted with material life, but they are also now so much degraded that they will not hear our philosophy, simply mocking. So our devotees may become very much learned to remove their doubts and become very much fixed up in Krishna consciousness. But so far, preaching to the general public, especially the hippie class, it is better not to preach very much philosophy, just somehow or other get them to chant Hare Krishna mantra. And if some of them are curious to learn something, they may purchase one of our books. And only if they chant with us, that will help them. July 29th, at Edinburgh, Prabhupada was greeted by almost a dozen reporters from various newspapers in Scotland. Kishora. Edinburgh is a stuffy, puffed up tradition street place, but Prabhupada was very cordial and humble with the reporters. He was giving them so much credit about how nice the country was and how nice Edinburgh was, what nice buildings we have here. And he was saying, you have two colleges here. Yes, yes, we have two. Very proud they were, very proud they were. So you have many students here. Yes, yes, it is very, it's a very affluent city, Edinburgh. Yes, oh yes, yes, very rich, opulent. And then Prabhupada said, so you have so many students and you have so many nice, big, big buildings. You have so much facility for enjoyment. And they were agreeing, yes, yes, we have all these. And Prabhupada just looked at them straight and said, then why are your universities producing hippies? They looked at one another and no one could answer. And Prabhupada began to explain how society cannot bring happiness or contentment simply with buildings, stones, and windows, he said. Where is the happiness there? In Glasgow building, Prabhupada lectured at Woodside Hall before an audience of almost 1,000. Kishora. Prabhupada was sitting on stage on his Vyas asana. The crowd was very large and even the balcony was overflowing. When Prabhupada arrived, the students greeted him like a pop star. They were cheering and whistling. Prabhupada immediately began lecturing very heavily on the basic science of Bhagavad Gita, how Arjuna became a successful devotee by killing all his friends and relatives. At the end of the lecture, I was little apprehensive as to whether the people would accept that heavy lecture or not, but they cheered and applauded. To July 26th, in Amsterdam, Prabhupada installed the deities of Lord Jagannath, Lord Balrama, and Subhadra and lectured in front of thousands of hippies. And one day at Wandle Park, a devotee was addressing when Prabhupada asked them to stop and hold a kirtana, saying these people are useless. And he said, and then he wrote to a disciple in the West saying about his observings in Europe that many hippies are attending, they are disgusted with material life and they are so degraded that they will not hear our philosophy, they will simply mock. So devotees may become very much learned to remove their doubts and become very much fixed in Krishna consciousness. So preaching to general public, especially the hippie class, is not very much the philosophy. But ask them to chant Hare Krishna mantra. If they are curious to learn, they should purchase one of our books. And if they chant with us, that will help them. And July 29 at Edinburgh, Prabhupada was greeted by a dozen of reporters in Scotland. And Kishora, he said, like, Edinburgh is like stuffy, puff place, but Prabhupada was very cordial and humble to the reporters. He was giving so much credit about how nice the country was and how nice Edinburgh is and the buildings. And then Prabhupada asked if you have colleges here. The answer was yes. They were very proud in answering. And there were students, they said yes. And they said it's an affluent city, Edinburgh. And the students replied, yes, it's rich and affluent. And then Prabhupada, after asking all about the big buildings and the opulences, said then, how come in spite of having all these things, the universities are producing hippies? And the students looked at one another and they could not answer. And Prabhupada began to explain that society cannot bring happiness or contentment simply by building buildings with stones and windows. He said, where is the happiness there? In Glasgow, Prabhupada lectured at the Woodside Hall before an audience of almost 1,000. And Kishora said Prabhupada was sitting on his Vyasasana and the crowd was very large. Even the balcony was overflowing and students greeted him like a pop star and they were cheering and whistling. Prabhupada began lecturing on the basic science of Bhagavad Gita, how Arjuna became successful devotee by killing all his friends and relatives. But at the end of the lecture, he was a little apprehensive as to whether the people there would be able to understand that heavy lecture or not. But they cheered and applauded. So when it came to the question and answer time, when
You haven't read this,
yeah,
right?
no.
Yeah. You're fast. That's good. Vijayan Prabhu, you can finish this.
When it came to question and answer time, one man came all the way down the aisle from the back of the hall and stood at the foot of the stage and looked up at Prabhupada. For several moments he spoke on and on, talking very proudly, I am this, I am that, and then concluding, I am God. That was the conclusion of his little monologue. The whole crowd was hushed, and I thought, what's going to happen now? Prabhupada simply looked down and let the silence continue for a few moments more. Then Prabhupada spoke, so you are God. You have nothing more to say. You are not God, you are dog. And immediately the crowd stood up and applauded and cheered. The man looked at Prabhupada and a smile came on his face. With just these few words, he had been defeated. He simply walked all the way back again to the back of the hall and was finished. It was an ecstatic because the crowd was participating in the whole thing. They all realized that God is not cheap. Then we had Kirtana and everyone in the audience was dancing. At that time, they had gotten a bit lax at the door and the local street urchins from this low-class area of Glasgow came into the hall and they all began dancing and singing. Some of them tried to get up on the stage. Prabhupada was also chanting, and so these kids were also trying to get around him and get on the stage to chant. The devotees started to push these dirty little children off the stage, but Srila Prabhupada said, don't do that. These children are all devotees, let them chant. When Prabhupada finally got up to leave again, he reminded me of some big celebrity. He was smiling and waving, walking off the stage, and the audience were all shouting, no, no, no. They began chanting more and more, more. So after the lecture was done, it was like a question answer time, and one person came all the way from the ISL back of the hall and came to the stage, and he looked at the Prabhupada, and he made a speech for several moments, and then he was talking very proudly that I'm this, I'm that, and he concluded that he was a god. And then the whole crowd was hushed, and Prabhupada simply looked down, and he was silent for a few minutes. Then he spoke like, so you are God, then do you have anything else to say? You are not God, you are dog. So this response made the crowd to stood up and they applauded and cheered, and that man looked at Prabhupada and he smiled, and then within just few words, he had been defeated. So he walked back again to the back of the hall, and it was finished. So the entire crowd, they realized that God is not that cheap. And then they had the kirtana, and everyone in the audience was dancing. At the time, a bit lads at the door, and the local street urchins from the local area of Glasgow came into the hall. They also began dancing and chanting, and some of them tried to get onto the stage, and Prabhupada was chanting, and there was some kids trying to go around him. But when devotees started to push these dirty little children off the stage, but Prabhupada said, don't do that, and these children are the devotees, and let them chant. And when Prabhupada was ready to leave the stage, and he was like treated as a big celebrity, and he was smiling and waving, walking off the stage, and the audience were shouting no and no and no, and then they began chanting more and more.
Isn't it unbelievable how a person going from one place can transform, and just taking Hare Krishna mantra. We didn't have it. No one has a guts to do. Prabhupada can lead thousands of people, and he was so confident. He was so confident that people will on the process. He's so confident. I want to thank you all for reading tonight. We will Monday, Tuesday is Radhashtami, appearance of Srimati Radharani. It's a very, very auspicious day. We all will fast until noon. Tuesday morning also, you will join. In the evening, there's temple program. And the morning, we'll have His Holiness Bhakti Purushottam Swami Maharaj from Mayapur. He will join. Both Philadelphia and Delaware we will do 7:30 a.m. And Prasanti asked, she wants to do service. Yes, please come. Keep things nice and get ready the place, cleaning and whatever needs to be done, shining, so we can have the wonderful celebration of Srimati Radharani ki jai. With her blessings, with her mercy, only we can get the devotional service. Without, otherwise not. So we'll cook nice feast, nice decorations, and nice kirtan that day. Is that okay? Should we end it here? Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Shri Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhupada ki jai.